So this is another studying stream where I talk about the book Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. Today I'm going to read the ninth paragraph, but before, as usual, I want to recite the entire thing from my memory. So one of the reasons why I do this studying stream is I want to memorize as much as possible this book. So ideally, I'll memorize the entire book, but if not, at least I'll memorize the first chapter. And now let's go on. The will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise, the famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, perplexing, questionable questions? It's already a long story, yet it seems as if it were hardly commenced. Is it any wonder that we at last grow distrustful, lose patience, and turn impatiently away? That this Sphinx at last teaches us to ask questions ourselves? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What is really this will to truth in us? In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, until at last we came to an absolute standstill before a yet more fundamental question. We inquired about the value of this will. Granted that we want the truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here? Which the Sphinx? It would be a rendezvous of questions and knots of interrogation. And could it be believed that it at last seems to us as if the problem had never been propounded before, as if we were the first to discern it, get a sight of it, and risk raising it? For there's risk in raising it. Perhaps there's no greater risk. 2. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or the generous deed out of selfishness, or the sun bright vision of the wise man out of covetousness. Such genesis is impossible. Whoever dreams of it is a fool. Nay, worse than a fool. Things of the highest value must have a different origin, an origin of their own. In this transitory, seductive, illusory, paltry world, in this turmoil of delusion and cupidity, they cannot have their source, but rather in the intransitive, in the lap of being, in the concealed God, in the thing itself. There must be their source and nowhere else. This mode of reasoning discloses a typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all times can be recognized. This mode of valuation is at the back of all their logical procedure. Through this belief of theirs, they exert themselves to their knowledge, to something that in the end fundamentally, solemnly christened the truth. The fundamental belief of metaphysicians is the belief in the antithesis of values. It never occurred even to the wariest of them to doubt here on the very threshold, where doubt, however, is most necessary, though they had made a solemn vow, de omnibus dubitandum. For it may be doubted, firstly, that the antithesis exists at all, and secondly, that the popular valuations and antithesis of values, upon which metaphysicians have set their seals, are not merely superficial estimates, merely provisional perspectives. Probably, besides, are not merely superficial estimates, merely provisional perspectives. Besides, probably being made from some corner, perhaps from below, frog perspectives, as it were to borrow an expression current among painters. in spite of all the value that may belong to the truth, the positive, and the unselfish, it might be possible that a higher and more fundamental value, generally for life, should be assigned to pretense, to the will to delusion, to selfishness and cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes those good and respected things consist precisely in their being insidiously related, knotted, crocheted to those evil and apparently opposed things, perhaps being essentially identical with them, perhaps. But who wishes to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that investigation, one must await the advent of a new order of philosophers, such as will have other tastes and inclinations, the reverse of those hitherto prevalent, the philosophers of dangerous, perhaps in all sense of the term. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such philosophers beginning to appear. 3. Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers and having read between their lines for long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of the conscious thinking must be counted among the instinctive functions. And it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew as one learned anew about heredity and innateness. Just as little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little being conscious is opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels. And behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, there are valuations, or to speak more plainly, physiological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode of life. For example, that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuations, in spite of their regulatory importance for us, might notwithstandingly be only superficial valuations, special types of stupidity, such as might be necessary for the maintenance of beings such as ourselves. Supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things. 4. The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is how far an opinion is life furthering, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps even species rearing. And we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, to which synthetic judgments a priori belong, are the most indispensable for us, that without recognizing of reality, that without a recognizing of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality to the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner. And philosophy, which ventures to do so, has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. 5. That which causes philosophers to be regarded half mockingly and half distrustfully is not the oft-repeated discovery how innocent they are, how often and easily they make mistakes and lose their way. In short, how childish and childlike they are, but that there is not enough honest dealing with them, whereas they all raise a loud and virtuous outcry when the problem of truthfulness is even hinted at in the remotest manner. They all pose as though their real opinions have been discovered and attained through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, indifferent, divinely indifferent dialectic, in contrast to all sorts of mystics who fair and foolisher talk of inspiration. Whereas a prejudiced proposition, idea, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire, abstracted and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought after the event. They all are advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such, generally astute defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truths, and very far from having the conscience which bravely admits this to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage, which goes so far as to let this be understood, perhaps to warn friend or foe, or in cheerful confidence and self-ridicule. The spectacle of the Tartuffery of old Kant, equally stiff and decent, by which he entices us into the dialectic by ways that lead, more correctly mislead, to his categorical imperative, makes us fastidious ones smile. We who find no small amusement in spying out the subtle tricks of old moralists and ethical preachers. Or still more so, the hocus pocus in mathematical form, by means of which Spinoza, as it were, has clad his philosophy in mail and mask, in fact, the love of his wisdom, to translate the term fairly and squarely, in order to strike terror into the heart of the assailant who should dare to cast a glance on that invincible maiden, that Pallas Athena. How much of personal timidity and vulnerability does the masquerade of a sickly recluse betray? 6. It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy up till now has consisted of. Namely, the confession of its originator and a species of involuntary and unconscious autobiography. And moreover, that the moral or immoral purpose in every philosophy has constituted the true vital germ out of which the entire plant has always grown. Indeed, to understand how the abstrusest metaphysical assertions of a philosopher have been arrived at, it is always well and wise to first ask oneself, what morality do they or does he aim at? Accordingly, I do not believe that an impulse to knowledge is the father of philosophy, but that another impulse has only made use of knowledge and mistaken knowledge as an instrument. But whoever considers the fundamental impulses of man with a view to determining how far they might have here acted as inspiring genii or as demons or kobolds, we'll find that they all have practiced philosophy at one time or another. Each one of them would have been only too glad to look upon itself as the ultimate end of existence and the legitimate lord over all the other impulses. For each impulse is imperious and as such attempts to philosophize. To be sure, in case of scholars, in case of really scientific men, it may be otherwise, bare, if you will. They may really be such a thing as an impulse to knowledge, some small, independent clockwork, which, when well wound up, works away industriously at that end, without the rest of scholarly impulses taking any material part therein. The actual interests of the scholar, therefore, are generally in quite another direction, in family perhaps, or in money making, or in politics. It is almost indifferent, in fact, at which point of research his little machine is placed, and whether the hopeful young Walker becomes a good philologist or a mushroom specialist or a chemist. He's not characterized by becoming this or that. In the philosopher, on the contrary, there is absolutely nothing impersonal. And above all, his morality furnishes a decided and decisive testimony as to who he is. That is to say, in what order the deepest impulses of his nature stand to each other. 7. How malicious philosophers can be. I know of nothing more stinging than the joke Epicurus took the liberty of making on Plato and Platonists. He called them Dionysio Kalakis. In its original sense and on the face of it, the word signifies flatterers of Dionysius. Consequently, tyrants, accessories, and leak spittles. Besides this, however, it is as much as to say they all are actors. There's nothing genuine about them, for Dionysio Calax was a popular name for an actor. The latter is the really malignant reproach that Epicurus cast upon Plato. He was annoyed by the grandiose manner, the mise-en-scène style, of which Plato and his scholars were masters, of which Epicurus was not a master. He, the old school teacher of Samos, who sat concealed in his little garden at Athens and wrote 300 books, perhaps out of rage and ambitious envy of Plato. Who knows? Greece took 100 years to find out who the garden god Epicurus really was. Did you ever find out? 8. There is a point in every philosophy at which the conviction of the philosopher appears on the scene. Or to put it in the words of an ancient mystery, adventavit asinos, pulcher, and fortissimus. All right, done. So now let's go on, read the 9th paragraph and talk about it for an hour. Yeah, I decided to limit my time to an hour since I don't like to talk too much. I've noticed that it makes me a little bit more, I talk too much and it's unnecessary. Let's learn to be precise and certain and short. Yeah, learn to be short, I guess. Something that I've never been able to do. Anyway, you desire to live according to nature. Oh, ye noble Stoics, what fraud of words. Imagine to yourself a being like nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose or consideration, without pity or justice, at once fruitful and barren and uncertain. Imagine to yourself indifference as a power. How could you live in accordance with such indifference? To live is not that just endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature. Is not living valuing, preferring being unjust, being limited, endeavoring to be different? And granted that your imperative living according to nature means actually the same as living according to life, how could you do differently? Why should you make a principle out of what you yourselves are and must be? In reality, however, it is quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read with rapture the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary. You extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. In your pride, you wish to dictate your morals and ideals to nature herself, and to incorporate them therein. You insist that it shall be nature according to the Stoa, and would like everything to be made after your own image as a vast eternal glorification and generalism of Stoicism. With all your love for truth, you have forced yourself so long, so persistently, and with such hypnotic rigidity to see nature falsely, that is to say, stoically, that you are no longer able to see it otherwise. And to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves, Stoicism is self-tyranny. Nature will also allow herself to be tyrannized over. It's not the Stoic part of nature, but this is an old and everlasting story. What happened in old times with the Stoics still happens today. As soon as ever a philosophy begins to believe in itself, it always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical impulse itself, the most spiritual will to power, the will to creation of the world, the will to the causa prima. All right, so let's do reading comprehension exercise. Last week I tried to practice on Khan Academy. I discovered this site while taking a test, LSAT, and I was really glad to find this school, or whatever you call it. The idea, again, before I was subscribed to Khan Academy, and the last time I checked it, it was 2015, I guess, before I even started to study in English. Or maybe I checked it a few times more, but there was nothing like there is now. There was nothing like that, which, damn it. Okay, it was really amazing. And I started practicing reading comprehension. So essentially, there are very similar tasks. So there's a paragraph, and it's kind of paragraph from some scientific research, and so you have to read the paragraph, you have to analyze the main argument, and then you answer some questions. But the point is there are so many different ideas presented in each paragraph, and since you have to answer the questions correctly, it makes sense to really study the paragraph. So you not just read it, you analyze like the beginning of the paragraph, the main thesis, some examples, the final conclusion. And the problem with it is that I started practicing these tests, and I filled my mind with so much garbage, since I have to remember all of this. And no, I learned in depth, and then it stays just naturally. So even now, if I want to talk about it, I'll probably will be able to remember all these tests, all these paragraphs which I considered. But it also makes a lot of sense, since it teaches me how to understand better what's going on in the piece of text. And yeah, I want to apply the same, techniques for reading this paragraph. So first I want to summarize what's happening here. So Nietzsche, well, first I want to put my words, but then I go slowly and analyze every sentence. So Nietzsche basically says something like, Stoics, you are self-deluders. So you believe, like, he asks, what does it mean actually to live in accordance with nature? He says, how could it be otherwise? And then he says, like, he starts that, he cites some features of nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose, consideration. And he says to Stoics, like, how can you live with such a, in accordance with such a great thing? So if you want to be like nature, it's virtually impossible for you, since you are limited and you're just pieces of shit, and nature itself is just everything. So you can't be like nature. But even if you want to be like nature, it's like you don't want to be like nature itself. You want to be like you. So you created some ideal, and you want nature fit in this ideal. And well, he basically tries to criticize Stoics for their, at the end of the paragraph, there's a reference to self-tyranny, and Stoicism is kind of self-tyranny. So you restrict your senses, your feelings, you follow certain, impulses, maybe something like your conscious and what's morally right. But essentially, it's not living in accordance with nature. Nietzsche basically reverses the entire idea. So he says, if you want to be morally right, if you want to follow certain principles, like your Stoic principles, you shouldn't say that you want to live in accordance with nature. You want to say that I want a nature match this ideal. So I want a nature be this and that. Yeah, I guess this whole paragraph is very relevant to modern discussions about morality and about, science, objective morality, since in Stoicism, it is the beginning of this idea, like objective morality and reason and consciousness and conscientiousness and conscious itself. Yeah. So there's nature. Nature is cruel, indifferent, doesn't care about anybody and anything. But here we are human beings. We believe that there are certain principles, and we can make our societies, we can, essentially develop our species by dictating nature how it must be. And again, Nietzsche doesn't want to say it's bad to have these ideals. All he wants to say is just it's lie. It's not truth. So if you want to see the truth, you have to look at the nature itself, and you have to see how it how it is, instead of prescribing it how it should be. But if you want to prescribe how it should be, yeah, you might say, this is our principle, this is what we want to achieve. We want to make, nature what follow our principles. Yeah, and makes sense. But again, the point is, it's lie. It's noble lie. It's whatever, magnanimous lie, but it's still a lie. So when you understand that it's a lie, then probably it makes sense to even practice it. Yeah, I guess I was practicing Stoicism for a decade, and I became a master of my own senses and feelings. So it seems I may command everything to myself. So my nature essentially is playing video games. So if I would follow the nature, my desires and wants I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't sit and, study anything and read books and write books and, do all sorts of social activities. I would sit and play video games because it's in my nature. I want to play fucking video games. But since I developed some kind of, philosophy during last 10 years, so now I can easily control it. I don't need to play video games, and I know how to calm down my passion. So sometimes it appears, sometimes it rebels against my conscience, and I may spend a couple of days or sometimes a couple of weeks in a year or in a half a year playing video games. But most of the time, I can't control it, and I even, make this desire work for me. So when I study English, when I study philosophy or science, I usually consider it as a kind of video game, as a kind of game. When I sit at the computer, I'm trying to play with words, I'm trying to organize them in a certain structure. I'm trying to understand them. I see how I can develop my understanding. And it makes a lot of sense. And I also think like in terms of video game playing, like in terms of a duration. So in video games, I could play 5, 10, 15 hours uninterruptedly. And now I can do almost the same with this game, with language games. So I want to play like linguistic game for 5 hours, for 10 hours. And it seems to be possible, but the question is how to do it on a kind of, how to do it in a kind of stable way. So I can easily learn for 2 weeks uninterruptedly for 10 hours every day for 15 hours. But then I lose energy, I lose my passion, and it's not what I want. So I want to learn probably like 5 hours every day, but it's gonna be unstable. It's gonna be stabilized. It's not just you learn 3 or 4 weeks and then you play video games for 2 weeks to get rest. So for me, it's like I'm trying to find the way how to organize myself in a way which allows me to study, essentially to read 5 hours a day. Yeah, that's kind of an objective which I'm trying to achieve. So reading 5 hours a day, writing 1, 2 hours a day, doing self-talk for half an hour a day, or recording studying streams and watching lectures, at least one lecture a day. Yeah, that's the ideal. Yeah. But nature, yeah, my nature wants to sit and play video games, jerk off, and do all sorts of crazy things. Yeah, where's my this thing? Yeah, I've noticed that yeah, I already recorded one of the studying streams without the without this window, this small window, and I don't like it. I like to be viewed. I don't know why it makes sense, but I guess it makes it a little bit more attractive. So when I just listen to the voice, it's not as attractive as when I listen to the voice and I see myself talking. Anyway, okay, let's go on and just digest this paragraph sentence by sentence. You desire to live according to nature, O you noble Stoics. What fraud of words. So fraud of words. What fraud of words? Yeah, I also like all these phrases. I still don't use them on a daily basis. So even though I memorized 8 paragraphs, I almost never use these phrases in a conversation or even in thinking. So when I think, if I analyze these paragraphs, I may, I usually remember and trying to reconstruct certain ideas. And I use these phrases and words, but usually in my natural stream of consciousness, they never occur. And I don't know why, but it seems like there's so many amazing phrases and expressions like fraud of words. What fraud of words? So whenever somebody says something, controversial or absurd, what fraud of words? Okay, you desire to live according to nature, O ye noble Stoics. What fraud of words? Imagine to yourself being like nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose or consideration, without pity or justice, at once fruitful and barren and uncertain. Imagine to yourself indifference as a power. How could you live in accordance with such indifference? So, nature is omnipotent, and live to live according to nature is, well, it's almost impossible since well, it may be possible for a society, not for an individual. But again, how it's possible for a society? So society basically destroys itself. Like nature doesn't care, create the entire species and then it destroys them, like dinosaurs or any other species. Yeah, I have heard recently that 99% of species existed on Earth extinct. And yeah, and nature, yeah, and for nature, well, there are so many talks now about humans and about what's like what's the name of the crisis, some kind of crisis which we may reach, so we may extinct. It's not an existential crisis, but maybe it's an existential crisis. Anyway, so the idea is that now we're doing so many things which may lead to our own extinction, and we have to be cautious and think deeply about our own actions to survive. And I guess for nature, like who cares about human beings, essentially? Like, are we the best species on Earth? Well, I don't think so. I think there may be an endless evolution. So human beings are just the step on this evolution. We may preserve our species, but essentially I believe that quite possible that in few thousand years we'll totally extinct, but there will be new species and those species will be much better than we are. And probably we or these species will not consider themselves humans. It may be some kind of cyborgs or whatever. But essentially the idea is that as soon as you are conscious and if you, let's say, belong to the dominant species on planet, you don't care. Like, I mean, I don't actually identify myself with a human. So even though I'm a human, I don't share this, cautious, whatever, anxiety about the species. So I think if it's possible for consciousness and will and nature, then it's like what we're talking about nature. So if it's possible for nature to create another species better than we are, better than humans, and become this species, become conscious and do something else, why not? I mean, I would prefer to be something else. So it's almost the same as to recognize that, for example, you are a chicken, and you may think, well, like to be chicken, like all we need to do is just preserve our species. But imagine that you know that they're humans, and possibly you can be a chicken or you can be a human. So what would you prefer to be, a chicken or a human? Probably if you may compare it, you may say, oh, it's better to be a human than to be a chicken. And again, it's very speculative, but the idea is quite clear. So if there are some species which are better than humans, why not be these species instead of being humans? Why limit our whatever? Why limit the nature with our species? And I don't think that life is life has reached its peak in us. So there are many possibilities for other species, and probably the best way for these species to arrive is our extinction. So maybe we have to extinct before a new species will appear. So most of these talks which I hear on the internet by people who are worrying about human species, about our existence, I find them quite superficial. And well, it's from from a perspective of a determinist, it doesn't make any sense. So you probably have to worry about your own actions and about your own survival, even if you care about. But again, what does mean your own? So I basically find consciousness and language, I guess, the best, like not the best, but to preserve the language, to preserve the ability to communicate and have all these variations. It seems to be more important than to preserve our structures of our bodies or our brains or whatever. So if we may create new bodies which are capable of communicating with each other by using language, and if we're able to preserve language, it makes a lot of sense. So we may lose our biological bodies, but we may create different, or nature may create different bodies which may live for hundreds and thousands of years, or which not necessarily should live for thousands of years. Yeah, I'm not sure that it's the best to have lifespan in 1,000 years. Like, what the hell are you going to do for 1,000 years? People say, oh, there may be a variety of different activities which may be quite interesting. But if you think about it from from a higher perspective, yeah, I would like to be I would like to live 50 years and then be reborn in a new body if I think that I'm a nature, let's say. Yeah, and from the perspective of nature. So what would you like to be? A human who lives 1,000 years, or a human who lives like 50 years? But, in 1,000 years, you have 20 different lives. And, what's better? To live one long life of 1,000 years, and everybody lives for 1,000 years, obviously. So it's not, of course, if you live among humans and you have an opportunity to live for 1,000 years, well, it may be nice, it may be interesting, especially if you don't have diseases and any physiological or linguistic problems. But if everybody lives 1,000 years, doesn't matter. Doesn't really, there's no difference whether or not you may live 1,000 years or 100 or 10 years. And it seems that 50 years, 100 years, it's actually enough to figure out what's going on in the world, to figure out, to experience all sorts of amazing stuff, and then die and allow nature to create new bodies out of your body, essentially out of the material which your body collected during its existence. Anyway, nature, Stoics. Yeah, nature is, it's a kind of God here. And there are many philosophical schools which believe that nature is God. Spinoza, for example, his idea of God is basically the idea of nature. So to live is not that just endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature. What does this mean? To live is not just endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature. He basically asked the question, like, what is life? Is life the same as nature? Or is life something different? Maybe something of the opposite sort. So you don't want to be boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent. You want to care about something. Yeah, you pick up a body and you care about this body and other bodies and whatever. But nature, for nature, like, there are so many, so many different bodies, like planets, stars, black holes, all sorts of things. And to lose just for nature, our planet makes very little sense when we think about it. Like all our history, all our civilizations, it's all about let's say 10,000, well, not okay, let's say 1 million cycles around the sun. And for nature, there's billions of suns, billions of planets. And our life is just nothing. We say, oh, we're conscious, and we don't know that probably there are there is nothing as consciousness in the entire universe. Well, maybe it makes sense too. Maybe consciousness, like, for nature, it's very hard to have consciousness. Maybe it wants to get rid of it since it's painful. Well, it's also pleasurable, but who needs such pleasure? Well, yeah, nature needs. Anyway, so nature, like you don't want to be like this. Nietzsche says to Stoics, you don't want to live according to nature. You wanna live otherwise. All right, it's not valuing, preferring, being unjust, being limited, endeavoring to be different. Yeah, he basically says like it's not living something different, right? Like making choices. Nature doesn't make any choice. It's indifferent. It doesn't care. But you evaluate, you prefer, you are just or unjust, and yeah, that's what makes you you, probably. And granted that your imperative, living according to nature, means actually the same as living according to life. How could you do differently? And again, yeah, the idea is living to live according to nature. But what does it mean? Like there's a problem. For Stoics, there's nature and there's some artificial, whatever it may be, like nature and what can be outside of nature. Okay, let's say some kind of God or consciousness or some kind of absolute world. Yeah, and maybe some sort of animalistic life. So humans are famous for their intelligence and lots of rules. And Stoics says, no, like let's not follow all these rules, and let's not be too over reasonable. Let's live according to nature, like dogs or cats or all sorts of animals, without worrying about any artificial stuff, like simply feeling emotions, you know, eating, walking, not thinking too much. Yeah, thinking, I guess, like, well, it may be counterintuitive, but it seems that thinking here is not valuable for Stoics. But when you read Stoics, you wouldn't say that they're bad at thinking. It, they certainly know how to think. Anyway, so why should you make a principle out of what you yourselves are and must be? So why should you make a principle? So you're essentially a part of nature, you live according to nature, but why should you say that you have to live according to nature? What's the purpose? In reality, however, it is quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read with rapture the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary, you extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. So he says, yeah, but I think the idea which which crossed my mind when I was reading was that you say you want to live with accordance to nature, like according to nature, and why is that? Because you don't do actually, because you think too much, you live in your linguistic world, so you pay attention to your thoughts instead of paying attention to your feelings. And yeah, probably this ideal stoicism was like focus on your feelings, focus on your thought, like don't allow your thoughts to lead you in some dangerous places. But at the same time, yeah, there were really strong, conscientious thinkers who could dictate everything to, like, if we consider this distinction or this opposition between intelligence and will. So Stoics were very intelligent. They could command their will. It's like these guys who always choose to delay gratifications. You know, there. See, there's a piece of cake. You may eat it today, or you may not eat it today. You may not eat it. You may not eat it at all. Well, I mean, there's famous experiment with children when there was mushrooms and not mushrooms, but also a candy, let's say. So there was one candy, you have to sit and wait for 10 minutes. If you don't eat the candy, you get another one. And many children couldn't resist their temptation. And for Stoics, it's like you have to resist all your temptation. And that's what makes you a really great Stoic. But it's not living with accordance to in accordance it's not living according to nature. It's exactly like, again, it's not exactly, since your language and your principles and consciousness and conscious is the same thing as nature. Yeah, but Nietzsche makes fun of Stoicism and tries to reverse their principles, tries to show that all this is just something very, very what very strange. Anyway, in reality, however, it is quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read with rapture the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary. You extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. So Stoics say that they found their principles in nature. So and they based their philosophy on natural, phenomenon. But Nietzsche, no, it's not true. What's true? Okay, he'll tell us later. So in your pride, you wish to dictate your morals and ideals to nature herself, and to incorporate them therein. You insist that it shall be nature according to the Stoa, and would like everything to be made after your own image, as a vast eternal glorification and generalism of Stoicism. Yeah, all right. So suppose I created a kind of philosophy or an ideology which is very powerful. So I've learned how to control all my emotions, how to control my desires, how to manage all different linguistical and physiological states. And I achieved some sort of tranquility, since in Stoics the goal was to achieve ataraxia, and they took this term from skeptics. And ataraxia and Stoicism, and they were all, they were all in ancient time concerned with these ideals of how to become a virtuous person. And for skeptics, so what you do, you basically suspend judgment. For Epicureans, you achieve tranquility through studying nature, studying atomic theory, studying death and life, and essentially through knowledge, like getting more knowledge about the world and about themselves. And for Stoics, yeah, it was like following certain principles, and as they claimed, they derived these principles from nature, but essentially it's basically certain principles which were accommodated through studying other philosophical schools. And Stoicism was highly influenced by cynicism. I guess the first, I don't remember exactly all these names of all these guys, but yes, Stoa was founded on principles first developed by cynics. and also by Socrates. Yeah, like they all influenced each other. But once again, it's like a reason, a certain way of looking at nature. And it's not Nietzsche says like you're not talking about nature, you're talking about your certain principles. You defend your view with arguments sought after the event. So you found a good way of living. You found a good strategy for life. Let's say, you are mortal. It makes all sorts of all sorts of crazy thoughts appear. To get rid of these thoughts, to get rid of the anxiety, you create a powerful ideology. You learn how to not fear death, how not to be concerned with it. And you basically try to fool yourself saying that, nature, yeah, it's like not basic natural principles. But in reality, it's not natural principles, just developed principles. And can we say they're false? Yeah, they may be false, since if they're posted as some sort of absolute truths. So there certainly were great guys in Stoicism, like Seneca, for example. He is one of my favorites. The first time when I discovered Seneca, it was 2007. I was reading like aphorisms, a book of aphorisms, and I probably already mentioned it here in the studying streams, but yeah, I may repeat it. Who cares? So I was reading his aphorisms, and at that time, I thought it was a girl, since Seneca in Russian, in Russian language, if a name ends with a vowel, it's usually a female name. And I was thinking, wow, this girl is so wise. There are some amazing aphorisms, and I was thinking, wow, she's so wise. She basically knows everything much better than so many wise men. But then later, I found that Seneca was a man. he he wasn't a girl, and yeah, it was funny. And yeah, he was very powerful man, I would say. He was a teacher of Neron, Roman Empire, Emperor Neron, the Roman Emperor Neron, and he committed suicide when Neron ordered him to do so. And he was like, imagine that you are a teacher, you basically educate an emperor, you make him, he Seneca definitely failed in educating Neron, since if he didn't fail, Neron probably wouldn't order him to commit suicide. But finally, Neron ordered him, and Seneca just committed suicide, because for him, for these guys, like nature, they like for them nature was nothing. For them, like their language, their like self-control mechanism, or their discipline, like thinking discipline, were much stronger. So for a Stoic, if you say something, you do that, and essentially there's nothing to fear, since there was such like one of another guys, Cato probably. Yeah, I guess his name was Cato. He put his arm in fire to prove that he was very strong guy. Like he put his arm in fire and looked at it without crying or weeping, or without any sign, basically an emotional sign. Can you imagine something like that? To put your arm in fire and look how it burns. Yeah, there were people like that. There are some famous tales I've heard about. Maybe it's not about Stoics, but some ancient guys who, like, some of them was so crazy that they learned to control their nature, so they could commit suicide by holding their breath. So it's like the way which you can do, like if you are in trouble, just imagine like some people if there's a war or some situation when you are captured by enemies, and some people used to take some pills, to hold pills in their mouth for if there's such a thing, not to not to be tortured. You just take a pill and you die. But these guys, there was just so crazy. So you may hold your breath, and die. Like try to do that. I mean, your nature is much stronger. So if you decide I'm going to hold my breath and die, you'll like the probability that you'll succeed is almost impossible. And of course, there are people who doubted it, and I actually don't believe that it's possible. So I guess those people could lose conscious, but they still finally like it's almost like for me. I think it's well, I can say it's impossible. Of course, it's possible, but I don't believe that somebody did that actually. So when you hold your breath and die, I try to hold my breath. Like I've learned to do that for no, I could hold my breath for 5 minutes, but I know techniques which may be applied to learn like to basically fill your body with oxygen. And when you don't, it's not too hard to keep your breath to hold your breath for 5 minutes if you know how to do that and you practice it for a couple of months or maybe half a year. Anyway, let's get back to stoicism. I digress so often. Stoa, yeah, it's not living according to nature. It's like you take your stoic principles and you put them on nature. You inflict your principles on nature and say that's how nature should be, not I live according to nature. With all your love for truth, you have forced yourself so long, so persistently, and with such hypnotic rigidity to see nature falsely that is to say stoically, that you are no longer able to see it otherwise. And to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourself, stoicism is self-tyranny, nature will also allow herself to be tyrannized over. It's not the stoic part of nature. Okay, self-tyranny. Again, what like basically the idea is that Stoics are, they looked at nature in a certain way and they became convinced that how they live, everybody must live the same way to be happy, to be, to be alive, essentially. Yeah. And how do you become convinced in that? Well, you basically have many generations of Stoics who develop certain worldview, and I guess among them there were very strong people, very influential people, and as in every ideology. So you may say, like, you take any ideology, you see some examples. Most of the people who follow ideologies, they are just puppets. But there are those who create these ideologies. Of course, they're not puppets. They're basically some kind of superhumans. And of course, among Stoics, there were some superhumans, and people tried to copy, try to imitate their styles of life, and eventually develop such a beautiful, strong ideology. But again, it's just an ideology. And if you look at nature from this size, yeah, you may say, of course, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's powerful, it helps you to overcome all sorts of problems and build a very strong character, but it doesn't mean that it's natural. And like Stoicism is natural way of looking at the world, and it's the best way. So for Stoicism, of course, practice Stoicism, and it's like the best way of living when you create very rigid self-discipline, when you control all your passions, when you don't care about your sanity. You say, I prefer to live with according to nature, but essentially you master all your emotions, and then it may lead to all sorts of problems. So you become too rational. You may make a decision and commit to something, and then even if your senses tells you that I am tired, or I don't feel quite well to do to do that, or you have anger, or you have all sorts of emotions. You don't listen to these emotions. You just determined so well to follow a particular course, which you believe is right, that you detach yourself from this from the world. Hey, it may be good, but I'm not saying that it's wrong. And all I'm saying is just like it's not the only way. I definitely tried like through language. If you become a writer and when you develop your writing to a particular, like to the level when you can maintain daily writing for years, your identity shifts more to like this, whatever you command yourself to do, you basically are able to do. And if you don't like to do that, nobody cares. Like when I set a goal, when I commit myself to daily writing or to certain exercises, I still try, like in me on a personal level, there are quite often I find myself, I decided that I'm going to do exercises every morning for 2 hours, but after 5 days or 3 days, I feel a little bit, I feel some kind of discomfort, and I stop. I don't force myself to do everything like until I basically don't feel anything. No, I try to use my senses as well as my reason, and well, so far it was very productive. But there were moments when I could prescribe myself certain behavior for an entire day, and I was able to maintain such sets of prescriptions on a daily basis for months. So essentially, wake up, you decide in the first hour, you decide what you're going to do for the rest of the day. Then you do exactly everything how you decided to do that in the same sequence. Then next day you do the same, and essentially you create some kind of inner parliament when, like every day, you decide the course of your actions, and then you follow this course. And it's very powerful, but at some moment it leads to kind of you lose. Like for me, it seems as if you become an automaton. So you have these 10 minutes in your day where you decide what you're going to do, and then the rest of your day it becomes like you become a kind of, so you have 10 minutes of self mastery and 950 minutes of self-slavery. So you have a master, like 10 minutes who, like these 10 minutes dictate the rest of the day what to do, and then you follow it, follow your commands. It may be powerful, but at the same time it may lead to all sorts of unpleasant circumstances when you lose touch with your feelings. And then what may happen, I don't know, but stoicism like, once again, it's very powerful philosophy, but Nietzsche makes fun of it, and I enjoy how he makes fun of it, and I actually agree with most of what he says here. So living like according to nature, for me it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like nature, everything is nature. So for me, nature is there's no something on the other pole. So for me, nature is everything there is. There's language, which is also a part of nature. So we substitute the word nature with the word ontology, and we may substitute the word language with the word epistemology. But essentially, epistemology comes out of ontology, and like ontology is everything, and nature is everything. And to live according to nature, it's basically, that doesn't make even any sense. Just to live. So to say to live is also, it implies to say to live according to nature. But you may say, no, I want to live according to my conscious or language. Let's make language dictate my behavior. Then it may be different. Anyway, stoicism is self-tyranny. And well, to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourself, nature will also allow herself to be tyrannized over. Well, Oh, since you are a part of nature and you are able to tyrannize yourself, yeah, but how can you tyrannize the entire nature? Well, create societies and civilizations. That's what we are doing. We are creating the world according to our own preferences. We're destroying lots of parts of nature. But again, it's nature which destroys through us its own parts. So you can't say that we're somehow different. We're just the part of nature. All right. But this is an old and everlasting story. What happened in old times with the Stoics still happens today, as soon as ever philosophy begins to believe in itself. So, in the bottom line here, as elsewhere, Nietzsche is that there's some instinct, or well, later it grows into an ideology, but essentially there is some instinct and it wants to look on everything through its own frame of references. And every philosophy, well, he wants to say every philosophy begins to believe in itself, and it creates a certain image of the world and wants the world be like that. It always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical impulse itself, the most spiritual will to power, the will to creation of the world, the will to causa prima. All right, I've done it. Once again, few words about, like, let's put it in my words once again. So what's going on here in this paragraph? So it starts from attacking Stoicism. So there's question like, how can you live according to nature? Like, nature is boundless, nature is indifferent, nature is omnipotent. And you, like, for you guys, well, for you limitless Stoics, it's limited Stoics, it's impossible to live with accordance, according to nature. Well, I always say with accordance, according to nature. But then I say, well, even if you could, how actually is it possible to do that? Like, yeah, it's just to live according with nature, according to nature. It fraud of words. Yeah, what a fraud of words. Yeah, and then there's like, what is Stoicism? What's the nature of Stoicism? Is it following natural instincts, or is it creating some kind of a dominant instinct, some tyrannical force, and shaping nature according to the preferences of that force? So, and for Nietzsche, yeah, I guess he makes it clear that Stoicism is self-tyranny, and nature itself, she is not as gullible to fit in Stoic ideals. You now have lots of, I'm subscribed to subreddit Stoicism, and there are so many guys, naive guys who, not just naive, there are lots of powerful guys as well. But what I've noticed, like in most these internet forums and social networks, it's very hard to find somebody who really understands anything. So you go on certain forum, and there may be some people, but on average, like, who wants to spend time talking to newbies about, for example, Stoicism? Of course, if you wanna practice Stoicism, to go on Reddit and read some articles, it makes very little sense. You go buy books by Stoics and do certain practices. or no, to find the community of Stoics. Come on, that's so foolish. But anyway, yeah, I guess if one spends enough time searching for information, it's possible to find like-minded people. But the problem is, of course, do you really need to find like-minded people? If you have enough motivation, you may just go and read books and practice certain mindset. Like people, they usually lead to the opposite. So you become, you forget the goal and you become, involved in socializing and all these sorts of things which are more destructive which than the actual help. So once again, if I want to study language, for example, it may be helpful to find some people and talk to them. But what's even more helpful, you go read books and record studying streams. Dedicate a lot. Well, the question is, it may give you certain motivation if you do it with people, but it also it depends on the person. May suck motivation out of you as well. So if you really want to do something great, to do it with people who are, who are not committed to the same activity, it's just a waste of time. Anyway, I was talking about the 9th paragraph for an hour or so. This week I'm going to memorize it as I memorized all previous paragraphs, and the next week I'm going to start from reciting this 9th paragraph. Then I'm going to get and read the 10th paragraph, which is it's even bigger than the 9. Yeah, tough times. But I've noticed that it's easier and easier for me to memorize these paragraphs and to maintain this memory. Well, not the whole memory, but now I understand better how to rehearse every paragraph. I do it 2 times a day, like in morning and in the evening, and it takes usually just 5 minutes or even less. The first time it takes, of course, a little bit longer, but each new time, each new attempt makes it, it takes less and less time. So the first time it takes probably an hour to memorize this whole thing, maybe a little bit more than an hour. Yeah, the previous thing I memorized faster than an hour. So the 7th and 8th paragraph, I memorized them in 40 minutes or something like that while walking to the forest. But this one, I guess, is going to take more. It's probably going to take an hour. And then after I memorize it, I repeat it a couple of times to stick it into my memory. And then next day, one time in the morning, one time in the evening. At the end of the day, the third day, I could easily rehearse the entire paragraph. It doesn't take a lot of power. And anyway, okay, too much superfluous words. I think it's enough for today. See you another time.